most important thing to note about CM on the positive side is that they get 2 favors whenever they do a temple or sanctuary. That might sound like a small thing. It's super, super interesting and, is actually really, really powerful. So they get amazing return on doing temples and on doing sanctuaries. The other really, really critical thing about them is they get only 1 dwelling to start at the beginning of the game. So that means that it's like very sort of risky. Their start is often a little precarious, their expansion's a little precarious, but if they can get going, they can be really powerful. So we'll unpack that a little bit. The stronghold, new players mostly ignore the stronghold. You shouldn't build it too much. It kind of looks like it's okay, and it's not a horrendous building. The real problem is that the temple and sanctuary are just so good because they give 2 favors each. And that the stronghold is sort of at the opportunity cost of that. This special action that you get means if you take that, you get to do 2 actions in a row. So it's kind of sounds fun, but mostly you should try, particularly early on, you should try playing Chaos Magicians without the stronghold. By far the most common starting place for CM is D4. This just, is a really nice spot, E6, D5, C3, there tends to be a lot of upgrading around D4, and it's sort of in the middle of the map. And particularly the key being, can they get E7? If they can get E7 and then E8, that like D4 is like no brainer. Generally, D4 should be your default starting spot. And then from there, you're sort of trying to get to A6, maybe dig D3. But really cutting through here is the key. The other spot that I like, the second most common spot that I would consider is D7. D7, especially if you're going to see black on E10 and green on E9, sometimes you can get a lot of power around 1 from D7. You have D6 on 1 ship. Maybe you can start on temp shipping. I've done this where you start on temporary shipping and you actually are digging C5 and B5. Build B6, build B6 and D6, and even leave C5 and A12 empty and temple, and then you can build these ones round 2. That's something you can do with ECM, but definitely in general, D4 is going to be your most likely starting spot. Most of the time you'll be on that hex. Okay, so temples are amazing for Chaos Magicians, so we definitely want to be doing at least a temple in round 1. So we will have 6 workers. There goes 4 of our workers to make sure we're templing. So that's 2 for the trading post, 2 for the temple. We're going to grab 2 favors. And in general, the most standard favors to choose between for year 2 are Earth 1, Fire 1, Earth 2, Air 2. Those are like the standard favors. And then I'll come back to that decision. And then ideally, like let's say you're on dig scroll, then that's a great first scroll if you can, for example, get that gray in the middle of the board that's next to your starting hex. If you can dig scroll that, and then in a real dream world, maybe you're even taking the single dig power action and getting also the E8 yellow. So you're opening temple 2 new dwellings. That's a very, very dreamy round 1 for chaos. But even if you're just getting one of these, single dig or dig scroll with a temple, and that's a really solid first round. And if you're doing that, you might consider, Fire 1 and Air 2, since you're getting kind of some worker production going. But in general, in thinking about the decision between these favors, I would focus on, and I'd say this is one of the most fun things about Chaos, is like this mix and match of like each time you temple or sanctuary, like which 2 favors am I going to try to grab, and how do I use those to get cult rewards, etc., and how do I use those to rebalance my economy. And that's sort of really fun. So all of these are totally reasonable picks. And part of it is that I'd say in sort of vanilla Chaos Magicians play is if you're going to do this temple dwellings opening, you're looking to do the sanctuary in round 2 or round 3, or a second temple in round 2 or round 3, and probably grabbing the other two favors listed here that you haven't grabbed yet. And so some of it is like, okay, which of these two am I going to take in round 1 and which two am I going to take in round 2, right? Is a common way of thinking about Chaos Magicians. Now, part of what makes so that the other like really common good opening is Sanctuary opening. On the one hand, it's weird, right? Because you're starting on one spot, and so you're gonna go through round 1 and not put any new dwellings down. Feels pretty bizarre. On the other hand, you can grab your nice collector set of 4 favors in round 1, have kind of a little bit of everything, a scoring tool, coin income, power income, now worker income, or at least you have base 1 worker, and so now you have Earth 2, and that keeps you going. And so that's kind of like a little bit of everything, and it's just kind of pretty strong, right? And so as long as you can open Sanctuary and then expand in round 2, this is like a really, really nice way to start. The other thing that's kind of cool about this is if you're taking 4 favors all in round 1, and this is kind of the case if you're going to Sanctuary round 2 also, when you're picking which other 2 you might want to take, is you can also consider Water 2. You could replace any of those 4 sort of standard Chaos Magician's favors with a Water 2 that might, like one example is if it's Earth digs round 1, well, Chaos start with 2 steps on none on Earth. But if you're taking Earth 2, Earth 1, then taking a Water 2 favor along with those, you can put that step round 1 on Earth and be at the 4th step, right? So you can kind of see like sometimes mixing Water 2 into your favor choices makes a lot of sense because it can combine with the other ones you're taking to help you reach certain key thresholds on the cults. It also lets you just commit to being a bit more culty in that game in general. So that's how I would think about Chaos. So to open Sanctuary, of course, you'd love to be on the big building scroll because you just need 2 more workers to open Sanctuary and a couple coins. So being on that scroll is great because you'd score with it and it gives you the workers. But you can also take the worker power action over here and open Sanctuary that way and, hopefully get the coins action as well. But also, Chaos Magicians are happy to start on a priest, for example, and put that to cult and use those cult steps in combinations with the favors they're taking to reach the key thresholds, right? So they have some different options. Double dig's tricky for them to use because they're only on one spot. And so usually they're not a double digging faction, and it's really about, getting things going, grabbing favors and cool combinations for the, cult rewards and scoring potential, and then getting those 4 favors in some combination between rounds 1 and 2, sometimes 3, and then getting those dwellings out. So one of the things that makes Chaos Magicians kind of interesting to play is we said, usually you're on this D4 hex. Well, because they only start on one place, there's a little bit of there's this sort of frantic feeling of playing Chaos Magicians, which is if I don't spread out from here, am I going to get royally screwed or super stuck in one spot? So you have this feeling of is this going to work out? Is this going to work out? And so the trick is that you need to think about grabbing those 4 favors as fast as possible, but then also getting dwellings out as quickly as possible. And so those are basically the 2 things you want to be thinking about in the first 3 rounds. So whether maybe you Sanctuary on D4, like we said, or you're going to single dig or dig scroll E7 round 1 and Temple on D4. But either way, you're probably going to then Sanctuary and do a second Temple to get the other 2 favors. Or you're going to grab E8 as quickly as possible, and so that you can ship to D6 and ship to D7. Once you get here with favors, if you can get to this position with the 4 favors in hand from 2 temples or from a Sanctuary, you're golden. This is now basically guaranteed to be a good Chaos Magicians game. The issue is, and so, if dwelling scoring is round 2, trying to hit that sequence in round 2 is totally good, or you can Sanctuary and do that in round 3. Now, sometimes you're not going to be able to do this, right? Sometimes if E7 is, for example, occupied with a starting placement from gray, the key then is getting to 2 shipping as quickly as possible, getting to A6, and then being able to dig b4. You see this b4 hex here is really, really valuable for red when gray's in, because if you can get that, it opens up a9. It also now lets you, because we said you're on 2 ship, get to d6 and potentially then up to a12. Gray will probably take d7 before you can get there, but you can pressure it. But you can just see how much that opens up space. The other thing on 2 ship is digging d3 and then getting to e3. And now, there's a little bit of action. Maybe you're digging g1 to get to i5, 3 ship later digging this, heading into the corner, etc., to get to i1. But you can see that that's about getting dwellings out, right? Because you have to get your worker production going. But a fair amount of this does not lend itself to towning, right? Like a lot of it is we're scattering dwellings across the board with our ship increases. And I do think that's right. So you should think about them as, you can play the cults a little bit at the beginning. You're taking 4 favors, maybe putting a priest or 2 to the cults in either round 1 or 2. But then you really, more important already potentially in round 2 is, how am I getting my ship up to get these dwellings out, right? So you kind of want to think about Chaos Magicians as playing cults at the beginning of the game and at the end of the game, but not really in the middle. At the end of the game, they can do temples and grab 2 of those 3-step favors and race up the cults, particularly on fire and water. But in the mid game, we want to think, okay, where can we town? And so, this middle 3 that we keep talking about is an obvious spot for doing a town, or maybe our sanctuaries, we're gonna bridge to c2. And we town that way, either with e7 or sometimes they end up having to do something like this. The other common sort of town spot is to do something in the west here, right? So we said you can get to d3, e3 pretty easily. And then, either e2 or f2 are double digs, and this is a single dig. And so that's kind of a round 6 sort of town that can emerge for Chaos Magicians. And the other one is then sometimes around d7, you can do something with a bridge one way or another, where sometimes you can do a town up here, but keep in mind, towning is not a strength of Chaos Magicians. There'll be lots of games where you actually just have one town, for example. So yeah, I think that's mostly how I would think about Chaos Magicians sort of game plans playing out over time. You can be a bit pressure network a bit if you're able to get your dwellings out sufficiently, or you can be more culty. I would say in general it's easier, right, to just as long as you're getting enough dwellings out that you have worker production, it's a little easier to fight the cults hard, but every once in a while they can be pretty expansive too. Chaos are medium strength in general, but they're very high variance. If they have no color neighbor, I'd pretty firmly put them up on the strong side. And if they are color sandwiched, they're borderline unplayable. So that's also a note. Never put Chaos Magicians into a game where there's nomads and engineers. It's just it's not going to be fun. So one color neighbor they can live with. Hopefully it's not nomads. But then, if no color neighbor, all of a sudden they could actually, get network points, maybe still win cults. So they're pretty wide range for them, I would say. But really fun to play. So in terms of factors in the setup that will affect their strength a lot, one big one is nomads are a big bad guy to Chaos Magicians, because they're your color neighbor and they start on 3 spots. You're only starting on 1. So if you want to be on d4 as Chaos, now let's say nomads are on d3, they're probably on f3, and then they're either on e8 or b4. Both of those clog up your space. So if gray's on e7, nomads might be on b4, or if they're on e8, maybe they get e7. Chaos will get e7, but nomads might still beat you to b4. So chaos against nomads is really, really tricky, and you just have to figure out, okay, do I play off to a side? I'm probably going to play a really, really small footprint. The other thing is engineers are unfortunate because they'll start e7. And then they also, the other thing that I really don't like about engineers is they sometimes will take D6 before you can get there. And if gray's in the game, you really need to get A6, right? You need to be able to get over here so that you can expand more. If gray is taking D6 from the east, before you can get there, that like really curbs your expansion. Now you're really just stuck on the western part of the map. Dwarves don't threaten D6 as much because, yeah, they're blocking E7, but dwarves are going to focus on going south and connecting there. Fakirs are also not nearly as bad for chaos as nomads. They only start on 2 spots, and they have a harder time beating you to B4. If they start on E8 or something and flight dig D6 to B4, that could be problematic for you. But mostly Fakirs, it takes them a while to get to 2 range, and so you can beat them to a couple key hexes that keeps you going. So that said, Chaos Magicians are more sensitive, like particularly their network aspirations. If they have no color neighbor, they can definitely be a network faction. If they have any color neighbor, they probably won't be a network faction. And so that really is I think they're like, when they have no color neighbor, it's a really, really big swing for them, more than it is for other factions. In terms of scrolls, they really want to see big building in the game because they want to go sanctuary early, maybe even round 1. They really want ship scoring because we want to increase our shipping, and they kind of produce power and coins a little bit better than some of the other factions. So those are 2 that you really want to see in the game. They could be a bit flexible, but in terms of just in general their strength, I think that's what you're probably looking for. Also, ideally, there aren't any other cult factions in the game. So let's say no Orin, Swarmlings, or Cultists. If that's the case, then sometimes Chaos Magicians can do a late swoop on the cults. So invest a little bit early, maybe two key town in the mid game, maybe not, and then just focus on expansion and then do temples late for like 3 steps or a water 2 or something. That can be kind of nice. So they're like they definitely can be culty sometimes. So that's something to look for. If you have very low cult competition, that can be nice for chaos. When you're ready to get funky with chaos, you can try being digging CM. So try to get your worker production cranked up. You get a lot of access to coins, and then end up digging out towns or hitting a dig scoring round hard. You could also try doing a dwelling rush off of the temp ship scroll, either getting double dig that way or grabbing priest and single dig. That's good fun too. Pretty rarely will you get a chance to do that, but it's definitely a funky thing to look out for. Have fun.